Hello, everyone, to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest in the building. Jeremy Creighton is described as an international branding specialist. He has over 20 years of experience working with some of the world's most successful brands across the United States, Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. He's the co-founder of Passport Brand Design, an Orange County, California-based agency offering creative leadership to global businesses seeking direction on high-level brand strategy, evergreen and seasonal campaigns, and creative execution. I've had the pleasure to meet some of his team as well, and they're excellent across all levels. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Awesome. So one of the things that I was really interested in was your upbringing. Before we get into content and brand identity, I read that you spent your early years in a hippie commune, learning how the world works from a grassroots level, and then you went to private school. So I guess that was a big change. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and how those early years really had shaped you over time?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Australia, in Melbourne, and my parents were both teachers, and they didn't believe in the teaching system. They didn't believe it had all the elements that kids needed. So they started their own school with a bunch of friends, and it was the 70s. So they're naturally kind of earthy, and they bought this mud brick house as a communal kind of project, and then they had a really interesting friend group, and they decided that their friend group would bring more education to the kids rather than the teachers that were sticking to a regimented teaching program. So we did amazing things. Like there was doctors and there was artists and there was builders and whatever that parent kind of knew, that parent would take a day each and teach us things. So some days would, take apart a washing machine, and other days would paint or play music for a whole day and write our own songs. And yeah, it was a really cool way to grow up, So, but it had its limitations, like anything does. So I think it became really hands-on learning, and we learned a lot of skills, and we learned a lot of different things that were happening in life, but it obviously missed that programmatic kind of learning.
That's interesting. My mother is an English teacher as well, so I can relate to that. And then going to private school, was it a big change for you coming from that environment, or how did you adapt to it?
Yeah, it was for me and my sister. I mean, for my sister, I don't think she wore clothes for like 10 years. So I think, it was some of the formats that we just didn't have any of those formats. I'd get told hey, Jeremy, you can't just stand up and walk out of class whenever you want. I remember those things like, there's some formats here. There's set class times, and you had to call the teacher by the last name, and all that stuff was quite foreign. But I think education is about learning all different things as much as you can. So I think getting thrown from one thing to the other was a great grounding for me to understand the two different universes,
I love that, 100%. Let's fast forward to today. I know Passport has been recognized as one of the leading agencies, and you guys have worked with amazing clients like Coca-Cola, Nestle, Melbourne Football Club. What do you think makes a brand more attractive and more captivating than others? In what ways can we impact branding to make it more meaningful to the audience?
I think it's great. Yeah, it's a great question. I think, and branding's gone through a lot of changes in the last 20 years. And I really reflect on, if you think about how many drinks were in the Coca-Cola fridge 20 years ago, compared to how many drink options someone has now, it's very different. So back 20 years ago, the competitive advantage was huge. It was really hard to get a product to market. So brands had a lot of time to kind of, in the back room, in their NPD, kind of like working on a formula and testing a formula and launching that formula. And even if they launched an idea, the competitors really took a long time to catch up to what was happening. And you fast forward now, the competitive difference has just shrunk. I mean, and as soon as someone launches something, everyone's got the ability to launch a similar sort of product. So that lead to market time has gone. And And now you're relying on more than your functional attributes to win in the marketplace. So branding's become more important. It's the character of the brand, the stories behind the brand, the lifestyle that brand supports is now becoming really important for people to kind of, they're not just choosing, you know, oh, wow, here's a really different product. They're going, okay, here's a bunch of similar products, but which one do I align with? Which one do I connect with on a values perspective and a personality perspective and a lifestyle perspective? So that's what's really happened if you look at the big span of branding over the last 20 years. So that's really changed the course of what an agency has to do for a brand. It was really about, back then it was really about, hey, come to market with a really good campaign, a really strong campaign about your functional point of difference. And now it's like, hey, you know, come into market constantly evolving and telling the story about what your purpose is, not what your product is.
Makes sense. One of the things you talk about that I often don't hear about is, you know, the values and the purpose behind the brand. That's something that we don't often hear about. What would you say to those companies that say, if we identify with something or if we take a stand on our values, we might be missing out or losing a certain percentage of the market that maybe doesn't align as much? I'm thinking, for example, of Nike with the Black Lives Matter movement and those type of stuff, but they got some backtrack from part of the market. What do you think, or what should you say to brands that are maybe are afraid to take a stand or to establish a values that are meaningful?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Nike does a great job, but Nike knows who they are and they know what their purpose is, and they play that hero archetype of really supporting people that don't really have a voice. So it's not really about just, you know, Black Lives Matter. It's about a whole bunch of different groups that are trying to find their voice and trying to be seen and heard and need that sort of support. So they're doing a million different things at the same time, but they know what their purpose is. And I think you've got to be careful of the tactic versus the purpose that's underneath the tactic. And I think, you know, brands that don't have an opinion or don't have a point of view don't really mean anything to us. So we're really looking for brands to have a point of view and have a sense of character that's unique to them. They can still touch on all the things that are trending like Nike does, as long as it's authentically based on who they are and what they believe in, you know, and they're trying to build that relationship. I think of brands as just people. There's no difference. I mean, why we use archetypes is we're trying to turn a brand into a person. That's all we're really trying to do. Our whole process at Passport is like, how do you give a brand a personality? How do you make, you know, it's something that you can have a relationship with, rather than a brand just telling you stuff all the time.
Makes sense. You talk about archetypes. Is that a key component on the storytelling for brands, or how do you integrate an archetype into the storytelling component so that brands can relay that message towards their audience and their market?
Yeah, I mean, so Archetypes is basically probably our primary tool for branding in as we go through that strategy stage. And Carl Jung's theory of archetypes is that we can all be traced back to one of 12 core archetypes. And once you kind of understand that archetype, we now start to understand the person, what's motivating them to do what they do, what their wiring is that makes them think the way they think. And so we started using archetypes as a theory of, hey, even in the, you know, you can go to Coca-Cola and zoom in on the, you know, juice section, the juice category of Coca-Cola, and you can start mapping that whole category based on the archetypes and the characters that exist within a character in a category. And that way you can start to go, oh, okay, people like this juice because it really has these qualities to it. You know, so you just kind of look at the brands as people and start to kind of, then you can help brands kind of go, hey, you've got a personality here. It's quiet. Maybe we can bring that personality out a lot more.
I love that. I love that. We talked a lot about values and the mission of the company and how that is transferred to the audience. Um, what I don't know how often this happens to you, but when you're having conversations with potential clients or your team is having conversation with potential clients, how often do you hear about, okay, but what's the ROI of our values, or what's the ROI of creating that identity, and how can we measure? How often do you guys hear that, and do you guys have an answer to that? I
Yeah.
think it's personally, I think it's clear, but are people understanding?
Yeah, I mean, once again, just the history of branding, brands and companies and corporate used to do mission, vision, values, right? So mission, what's our mission, what's our vision, what's our values? But it was all a bit chest beating at the time because really the consumers didn't have a platform to connect with that brand. It wasn't a two-way conversation because we didn't have social media, we didn't have such all the mediums that could allow the consumer's conversation to come in. So brands used to just say, here's our mission, here's our vision, here's our values. They were very corporate as well. And it was all one directional. And then what happened is they realized, hang on, we're not inviting the consumer to this conversation. That's why purpose is now trending over kind of core mission, vision, values sort of stuff. It's still important to know where a company's heading,
Right.
what they stand, what they're trying to achieve in the world. But really, it's kind of like now it's more purpose based on like together with our consumers, where can we go? The ROI question is a good one. And you can measure sales, you can measure likes, you can measure, traffic. But I think you've really got to measure the ROI. Really goes down to the CDF funnel because you've got to really look at are we, and the CDF funnel is awareness, consideration, trial, repeat purchase, and loyalty. And if you really measure in those traditional zones, you really understand that, how the brand is really doing it at bringing new people into that funnel, and then helping them convert into the sales, and then helping them move them into kind of advocacy where they're now repeat purchasing, they're sharing the stories. So that's really the ROI we have on brand strategy, is really looking across that CDF funnel.
That's awesome. That's probably the best description I've heard to measure something that maybe you cannot track as Facebook ads, right? Facebook ads, you can say we got an ROI of 1.3, and then that's a specific number. So these are more a bit qualitative and an overarching perspective.
Yeah, and Facebook ads, we can put Facebook ads into the CDF, in terms of consideration. You clicked on it, you went to the website. It's a consideration kind of, measure. And then we can look at sales and go, that's a trial measure. And then we can go, how many people did we reach with an ad? That's an awareness measure. Once we have all those measures, we're really looking at the people who dropped from awareness into consideration, how many people dropped from consideration to trial, and how many people repurchased. And then you can start to go, where's our weakness? If our conversion between awareness to consideration is low, we've got a problem with, we're saying ads, people are seeing them, but we're not telling them what they want to hear. The story isn't meaningful enough for them to dig deeper. Or if sales are low, but our awareness and consideration's high, there's something wrong with our price point, or there's something wrong with our product offer. We're getting them right to the moment of truth, which is the purpose, the purchase moment, but there's something there that's stopping them. Once again, why didn't they repurchase, or why didn't they become part of the community? We can measure all that. And then that's where your marketing efforts start to kind of go to.
100%. We talked about bringing consumers and customers into the conversation. I think one of the best ways to do that is through content. You
Sorry,
talk about,
I've got a dog in the room.
Oh, you're good. We'll edit that. No worries. You talk about purpose-built content. Can you explain a bit more and expand on what purpose-built content is? Because it's a term that we don't often hear in the marketing industry, and I think we get what you mean by that, but we'd love to hear more on the details on how do you create that content that's made to drive purpose.
Sure. I think that, the last 5 years, we've realized we need a lot of content, and we need daily content. And so the need for content has grown a lot, especially even in the last 2 years. And there's a lot of agencies now doing content. There's a lot of people doing content, and content's expensive. So you've got to get the cost down to produce a lot of content. What's happening in the world of content is, because of the need for so much content, we're losing track of what that content all sums up to become a story over time. It was a lot easier when we just did a campaign for the year. We really knew what the message was. But as that campaign gets, compartmentalized into single day posts or blogs or whatever it is, we start to lose the perspective of like, what's the big story that we're trying to tell here? It's what's the sum of the parts, not just the parts. And that's what's really important, is making sure you've got a media plan and a strategy that, hey, over time, our purpose is really this. All our touch points need to work towards that message. And that message has got to be really clear. We can do that message in a million different ways and a million different, executions, like photography, video, illustration, storytelling, long form, short form. We can do it in a million different ways, but it's all got to be part of the one story.
Right. Moving a bit away from brand identity and content, one of the things that maybe surprises our audience is that you not only co-founded Passport, but you've also started your own companies over the last few years. I was wondering, at what point did you decide to spin off your own brands? I think we have a coffee roastery, Common Room Roasters. I believe there's a CBD brand. At one point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to do my own brands and maybe use the learnings from Passport to build those brands?
Yeah, I think I started a long time ago. I started my first craft beer brand about 15 years ago. And it was just, you're studying markets all the time, and you're studying categories all the time. And then you see these category needs happening and trends that are going on. And you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if a brand did this or someone did that? And then we used to have to do that for Coca-Cola, like, what's the white space? What should we do? But then I saw areas happening in other categories that I didn't have a client in, and I'm like, well, let's just do it. I did a beer brand because I wanted to get into Foster's, which is, a big company, CUB in Australia, and Foster's weren't in these cool pubs, and I'm like, it'd be, why isn't there any Foster's brands in the cool pubs, And so I ended up going, let's just make that our mission. Let's build a brand. Let's build a really cool craft beer and get it into all the cool pubs, And at the same time, I'd send Foster's a pack of beer every week to say, and on the top of the pack, I'd write a list of pubs we got into that week, and until they rang us and said, okay, we get it. Let's do something. So it was about, multiple, ideas at the same time, but it was really about kind of getting clients, and also seeing what clients were going through. Like, I think it's really easy to sit in a marketing room and talk about big ideas, but without that reality of like distribution, supply chain, all that sort of stuff that we don't really need to deal with in marketing. It's all done behind the scenes at these big companies. And I realized I just didn't know much about that stuff. So building a product from scratch, going through R&D, going through testing, going through, building up any brand from scratch, you realize we're working on these big brands like Coca-Cola, and they've been marketing for 150 years,
right.
And all that groundswell happened before we even got there. So to kind of, pat ourselves on the back to say we did a really good job with Coca-Cola, it's not true. So many people have got that momentum before we even got there. So it was a bit of a learning curve, and also a bit of just an entrepreneurial thing that I like to make stuff. So it filled that kind of need.
Yeah, I think I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think we're all curious to we see ideas everywhere, right? And we want to space ourselves to cover those ideas because there's just some element of curiosity. was it different to grow those brands versus a B2B agency? Because a lot of those brands that you mentioned, I think, are D2C, direct to consumers, versus a B2B brand like, or B2B agency, service-based business like Passport.
Yeah,
Is it a
yeah,
much different
it's a
process?
lot. Yeah, it's a lot different, and it uses different parts of the brain for sure. And I mean, it's been really good. I really have a lot of respect for any brands out there, because it's a lot of work to build a product and get it compliant and get everything legally squared away and actually grow the brand. So and that's been the biggest learning, is like, you think by just starting your idea that naturally everyone's going to love it, and you realize it needs advertising and promotion.
Right.
30% of your budget needs to go to advertising and promotion. You really need to spend against it. And I think Instagram and stuff can get you kind of, into that mum and pup phase really quickly, but no one really makes money. These brands don't make money by being mum and pup shops, or a single owner shop. They really need mass volume, and the challenge really becomes like, okay, how do you get from niche to mass? It's a real big challenge. And and I'm excited by that challenge, but you need cash, you need mass advertising, you need to have activity going all the time. Yeah.
That's very interesting. As a couple final questions, how do you balance your time, right? Because you have all these multiple brands with Passport. We've had the pleasure of interacting with you guys as a team, and it's a large agency doing incredible work. How do you balance, Passport with your own brands? Do you how I have enough with one agency? How are you able to handle everything around?
I think you've got to, you got to believe in what your product is. Our product's people,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just like, do you invest enough in your product at the end of the day? And do you've got to hire great people. You've got to pay them the right amount, and you've got to also give them the trust to own something. If you try to become that entrepreneur that owns everything, you'll struggle, because you're trying to control it, and you've got to believe in other people to own areas, and to go, hey, you got this, and help support them. Totally, you can't leave them, and you can talk through stuff, but it's really about having a great team, but staying connected, talking through the problems and the challenges that each project has, but just kind of give over the ownership, and that's what I think. That's what, like, the last 10 years of it's just like, how do you build trust in people? And sometimes that's hard, and sometimes it takes time, but it's like, have you got, my wife's amazing at building a culture, and she really believes in the culture of the agency, and, does the agency attract talent? Like, how can we support them? I mean, we've done things from, flying people over from Australia, buying cars, and, and leasing houses, and whatever those people are, because everyone's an individual and everyone's got their own personal challenges. And I think if agencies help people evolve, then they kind of see it as an amazing thing, and that they, help out as the company evolves. So I think it's just really, seeing your team as a partners, and not like you're the boss with staff. It's just like, we're all partners, we're all on the same level, and we're all got to share in the good of what we're achieving.
Makes sense. I know you're busy, Jeremy, so I want to get you out of here in a couple of minutes. As a last question, I was raised in Spain. I have dual citizenship, American, Spanish, in Barcelona. Now I live here in Miami. I know you guys have a big team that comes from Australia, but you guys have a headquarters, I guess, in California. What are some of the benefits, and if any challenges have come with it, of having this big international team, and not just team, but also mindset of like, we're a global company? What are the good and the bad that comes with it?
Yeah, well, you would get it, right? You go, I mean, the best thing we can ever do is travel, right? And when you travel, you kind of go, oh my God, this country does this so well. And this country does this so well. And the more you travel, the more you go, oh, it's so cool that in Japan they do this, and in Germany they're doing this sort of thing. And you realize there's some real skill sets around. There's also kind of like the creative community doesn't really have a country. It's more of a global community, and you find these little pockets like Austin and Portland and Melbourne and London. There's these little pockets of creativity, and you realize these people are very similar. They've traveled and they're interested in the same things. So we've got people in Canada, we've got people in Europe, we've got guys in Australia and New Zealand helping us out. We've got people all over the US that are fantastic. And I think it's just kind of trying to put a team together that also inspire each other. And, we've got a guy from Spain too. So he's like, hey, when, I had to do this thing for the soccer team in Spain. And that's such an interesting challenge that, you can kind of go, oh, that's really interesting how they approach that over there. I mean, we're launching stuff in Japan at the moment, and I'm on a daily call with the Japanese team, and they're going, yeah, that's not going to work. I remember getting told by one client, oh, the badass mum doesn't actually live in Japan. That's not a thing. And you're like, God, so I think it's great for your brain. It's great for the community of creatives that are working together and kind of learning from each other. So we definitely have a rule that don't just hire out of California.
Right. I love that. I love the term pockets of creativity. I think that resonates a lot from what I've seen as well. Jeremy, I think we could talk about marketing, branding for hours, but I appreciate your time coming in. We're going to put links to your website, to your LinkedIn, so that our audience can reach you there. But once again, thank you so much for your time, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to meet you.
Likewise. Appreciate it.